The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, we want to continue our conversation with Seth Rosenfeld, a longtime investigative reporter and author of Subversives, the FBI's War on Student Radicals and Reagan's Rise to Power. Now, Seth, we've had a long discussion on Richard Aoki, but he really is a small portion of your book. The large portion of it really deals, as the title says, with the FBI's attempts to surveillance and repression of student radicals and university professors. And you go into in depth about the efforts of the agency against Mario Savio and the free speech movement in Berkeley, and even against the president of the University of California system at the time, Clark Kerr. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. My book, Subversives, is a secret history of the 60s. It's the story of the FBI's covert operations at the University of California at Berkeley and the surrounding campus community during the Cold War. It's based on more than 250,000 pages of FBI documents. And one of the main parts of the book focuses on the free speech movement of 1964 and Mario Savio. The free speech movement was one of the first major student protests of the 1960s. It was nonviolent, it was inspired by the civil rights movement, and it was actually a protest against a campus rule that prohibited students from engaging in any kind of political activity on campus. So, for example, if students wanted to hand out a leaflet for the Republican National Convention, which in the summer of '64 was at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, they were prohibited from doing that. If they wanted to hand out a leaflet saying, "Come to this civil rights demonstration," they couldn't do that either. The students felt that this was an unconstitutional abridgment of their First Amendment rights, and that's what the protest was about. Mario Savio emerged as perhaps the most prominent spokesperson for the free speech movement. Mario is a fascinating character. He was born in New York City in 1942. He was extremely bright, had above genius level IQ, and in high school a 96.6 grade point average. He was raised in a very religious Catholic family. He was brought up to be a priest, and he, for much of his early life, thought he would become a priest. But as he went through high school, he began to have doubts about his faith. He began to question the dogma and became interested in philosophy and science. He began to look elsewhere to, as he put it, excuse me, as he put it, to do good in the world.
You know, while you take a water break, I thought we would play a clip. UC Berkeley's Sproul Plaza first drew national attention in 1964 when thousands of students struggled for their right to free speech on campus, led by, as you are describing, student activist Mario Savio. This is a speech he delivered nearly half a century ago on the steps of Sproul Hall.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
That was Mario Savio. Give us the context as you continue with Mario Savio's story of this address.
Yes. Mario actually had a very debilitating stutter when speaking in small groups of people. But when he was impassioned and speaking against what he believed was injustice, he spoke with divine fire. And that speech is an example of that. And people who were in that audience, in the crowd on Sproul Plaza that day, have said that that speech sent shivers down their backs. He moved people to participate. And as a result of his speech and all the work that the free speech movement had done, more than 1,000 people streamed into Sproul Hall and staged what was the nation's largest sit-in to date overnight, and more than 800 people were arrested the next day. And this was shocking that students would engage in this kind of behavior. At that time in our history, most campuses were characterized by a kind of complacency and conformity. And the free speech movement was a major break from that. And it was very shocking to people, particularly J. Edgar Hoover. According to the FBI documents that I've reviewed, the FBI had special concerns about the University of California starting at least in World War II. As you know, the University of California played a key role in developing the atomic bomb that was used to end World War II. And during the war and immediately thereafter, there were Soviet efforts to obtain, through espionage, using members of the Communist Party, secrets from the radiation lab. So some of the records I look at document the FBI's extensive investigation into Soviet espionage at the University of California, Berkeley in the 1940s. But what you see in the following decades is the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover veers from that important national security mission to focus instead on professors engaged in dissent. And during the 1950s, the FBI had a secret program called the Responsibilities Program. And through this program, FBI agents secretly gave governors of nearly every state allegations against professors who were deemed to be too radical or too liberal. The governors would take this information secretly, pass it along to university officials, and have them investigate and question and sometimes fire the professors. Professors never knew where these allegations came from. They never had the opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses against them. Then
and Seth Rosenfeld, as you mentioned in the book, often the allegations that the FBI passed on were wrong, were erroneous, and people were tarred just because they may have been had met with somebody who was who's politically active in a left-wing movement, so that much of the information the FBI passed on was erroneous.
Yes, that's true. In a number of instances, I was able to document that in the case of California, the governor at the time, Earl Warren, passed along these reports to the president of the university, Robert Gordon Sproul. And when the university investigated them, they found they were unsubstantiated. So
and the role
that was an extensive program, and nearly 1,000 professors around the country were forced from their jobs as a result of it in the early 1950s. Then in the very early 1960s, you see, late 50s, early 60s, you see the FBI shift its focus to students who are engaged in political dissent. And the FBI starts to investigate them and creates, actually has a list called the Security Index. And this is a list of people who are deemed potential threats to national security in the event of a national emergency, and who would be arrested without warrant and detained indefinitely during an emergency. And quite a few professors and students at Berkeley in the early 60s were on this secret list. In fact, at that time, former agents told me that the FBI considered Berkeley to be one of the most radical cities in the United States, with the highest per capita number of people on the security index. So to come back to the free speech movement, when that happens in 1964, J. Edgar Hoover and other FBI officials see this as further evidence of a subversive plot to disrupt the nation's campuses, and they respond by intensively investigating it and going beyond investigating it with secret efforts to disrupt it and neutralize it in various ways.
Seth Rosenfeld, we don't have much time. We have less than 2 minutes, but you're following the trajectory of Ronald Reagan, who famously said in 1970, if it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with, no more appeasement. He's talking about the students. The role, how extensively Ronald Reagan was involved with the FBI, more than was previously known.
Yes, he was much more involved with the FBI than previously known, and one of the arguments in my book is that his covert relationship with the FBI had a profound influence on his political development. This relationship begins in Hollywood in the years immediately after World War II, when FBI agents approach Ronald Reagan and he becomes an informer. and he names other people in Hollywood, actors, who he suspects of subversive activity. And he names more people than we've previously known. Through my Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, I obtained more than 10,000 pages on Ronald Reagan during his pre-presidential years. This is the most extensive record of the FBI's activities concerning him. When Reagan is president of the Screen Actors Guild, the FBI has wide access to information from Guild records about actors whom the FBI is investigating. And then later, the FBI returns the favor to Reagan by doing personal and political help for him. During my Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, the FBI was withholding certain information, claiming it was law enforcement information. And I challenged that. I said, the context suggests that this is actually personal and political help. And the court agreed and ordered the information released. And what those records show
5 seconds.
is that in 1960, for example, the FBI, at the request of Ronald Reagan and his former wife, Jane Wyman, conducted an investigation into the romantic life of his daughter, Maureen Reagan. The Reagans had heard that she was then 18, living in Washington, D.C., and they had heard that she was living with an older married policeman.